Thank you for taking our interview, Mr. Timmermans. We know that the EU has presented its Green Deal yesterday on Wednesday. So this climate neutral by 2050 seems to be a very ambitious target, and the deal is described as the man on the moon moment. How can it be achieved?
Well, I think our primary goal should be to reduce emissions, to make sure that we don't heat up the atmosphere more than 1.5 degrees. And that, of course, affects the energy sector first and foremost. And you will already see a shift towards sustainable energy, wind energy, solar energy. But we have a problem, for instance, with a lack of grid. We can't transport that energy enough across Europe. We also need to help cities, for instance, decarbonize so that their transport systems are organized without emissions. And we need to help households to get a hold of sustainable energy. So I think if you start with the energy sector, go to the transport sector, then look at agriculture, and then look at other areas so that our industry also changes and becomes a circular economy adapted to the fourth industrial revolution, then I think we can get there.
The recent UN emission gap report shows that many countries need to work 5 to 6 times harder to cut their carbon emissions to fulfill their commitments by 2020, and that also includes some European countries. So what's your response to this?
Well, it's disappointing to see that we haven't been able to fulfill the promises we've made so far. But that's also one of the reasons why we decided to come up with a Green Deal, because if we want to do what we promised to our children, to our society, by 2050 in the Paris Agreement, then we have to start going, and we have to look at all aspects of our economy. So what we've put on the table is actually a roadmap how this could be achieved. But it's not sort of a prescription with every detail. Member states will now have to come to the table in the European Union and discuss what this means for them. And then we can come to China and to other places with a proposition. Look what we're doing. Will you please join us for the sake of humanity?
You mentioned China. Of course, China has been making a lot of efforts in terms of cutting carbon emissions, but at the same time, we also see some countries withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, for example, the United States.
Yes.
Do you think this will have an impact on the overall sentiment of the negotiations at COP25 this time?
Well, first of all, of course, we're going through a rough patch in international relations. Let's be very clear about that. And a trade war is not good for anyone, and we should be avoiding having trade wars. But China, without China, there would be no Paris Agreement. China is one of the founding fathers, if I could call it that, of the Paris Agreement, which comes also with a responsibility to make it happen. And I still have the sense when I talk to the Chinese delegation that there is a strong feeling of responsibility also in China for the Paris Agreement. So let's work together. Let's show that the European Union and China jointly can make a success out of the Paris Agreement.
So you think Paris Agreement is still the way going forward?
Absolutely. I think it's one of the most beautiful things I've seen in my lifetime, the international community coming together to try and tackle, which is in fact an existential challenge for humanity as a whole.
You said this week that you will take measures to protect the competitors that don't respect the Paris Agreements.
Yes.
To impact the European industries. What measures are you talking about?
What we're saying is this. We have all subscribed to the Paris Agreement. To get there, we need to take quite a number of measures. These measures are quite a burden on our industry. They have to restructure, etc. So you have to invest in that before it leads to profits. If other parts of the world do the same thing, then we're on the level playing field and we can continue. If other parts of the world don't do that, don't take the measures that is necessary, then of course Europe will have to protect its own industry, protect the measures we take. And that could be done in different ways. There could be a carbon border tax. We could look at the ETS system to do that. But that is only sort of a safety measure, because rather I would have a discussion with other partners of how we collectively implement the measures we need to attain our Paris goals.
So one of the prevalent concerns for most developing countries at COP25 is about the financial pledges, and it's about the common but differentiated principles. So how do you the EU plans to address to their concerns?
Well, as far as the EU is concerned, there is no going back to the Paris Agreement. So we cannot weaken what we have agreed. But as far as the EU is concerned as well, there is some justification for especially the most vulnerable countries when they say we need some help here. And I think richer countries should pledge very clearly what they're going to do to help the poorest countries also adapt to the new situation, also make their measures, take their measures that are necessary. And I believe this solidarity should be shown also at the COP25 here in Madrid.
You have said that you prefer a no agreement than a bad one. So how do you see the negotiation ending this week?
I think there's still scope for a positive agreement. But as far as the European Union is concerned, we will not subscribe to a deal that takes us back from where we need to go in terms of reaching the goals in Paris.
Thank you very much.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you.